The snow fell slow that morning, the kind that hushed even the cruelest laughter. It drifted down through the open rafters of the auction barn, catching in the breath of the crowd. Beneath it, two girls stood barefoot on the wooden stage, one with skin pale as the winter wheat, the other dark-haired and still as carved stone. Their names had been shouted so many times that they no longer felt like theirs. The crowd called them the settler girl and the China woman. To the men with coins, that was all they were. Angelina May kept her chin up despite the tremor in her jaw. She had the kind of defiance that drew both scorn and secret admiration, the look of someone who'd been cornered too many times and learned to bite before she begged. Beside her stood Li Hua, quiet, almost serene, her eyes cast downward, her hands folded before her as though in prayer. The red mark on her cheek was still fresh from the last hand that struck her. She did not weep. She had run out of tears long ago. The auctioneer shouted over the wind that leaked through the slats. Two girls, strong for labor, both able-bodied. Take him together or not at all. He smacked his hand against the post, the sound cracking through the cold like a gunshot. A few men laughed. The rest spat tobacco juice and stared with the dull hunger of wolves watching a dying deer. The air smelled of sweat, mud, and desperation. Outside, horses stamped in the snow, snorting plumes of white breath into the wind. Angelina's fingers brushed Li Hua's by accident. She almost pulled away, but Li Hua looked up then, her dark eyes calm as river water, and for a breath, something wordless passed between them, a shared shame, a shared vow. They would not break easily. Not here. Not for them. The bidding began. $1. $1.50. Then silence. No one wanted what couldn't be easily owned. The crowd murmured. The auctioneer looked irritated. Well then, someone take him off my hands before I freeze my tongue solid. That's when the door opened. A gust of white wind swept through, and with it, a tall man stepped inside. He wore a long weather-darkened coat and carried snow on his shoulders like ash. His face was half hidden beneath the brim of a hat, and his boots sounded heavier than the others, as though he carried miles of sorrow in them. He didn't speak, didn't nod to anyone, just stepped closer, the light from outside outlining him like a figure out of some long, lonely tale. $2, he said. The crowd turned. Someone laughed. You'll regret that, Crow. They'll bite harder than they cook. But the man, Alex Crow, didn't answer. He dropped the coins onto the table. They clinked sharp against the wood, bright and final. The auctioneer snatched them up, almost relieved, and scribbled something on his ledger. Yours, mister. All legal. Take him. Angelina's throat tightened. We're not going, she muttered, the words breaking like glass. Li Hua didn't move, only stared at Alex with that same stillness that could have been peace or defiance. It was hard to tell. The man met their eyes, one after the other. His gaze wasn't cruel. It wasn't soft either. It was tired, like someone who had stopped expecting goodness in the world but still did what was right out of old habit. Get your things, he said quietly. We're leaving. Angelina laughed once, bitter. We ain't got things. Then just come, he said. No one stopped them as they walked out into the cold. The crowd parted, half jeering, half curious. Angelina felt the sting of humiliation melt into the sting of snow on her cheeks. She pulled her shawl tighter, her pride burning hot enough to keep her from shivering. Li Hua followed, her steps light, her eyes scanning the horizon as though memorizing the freedom she was being led away from. Outside, the wind was merciless. The world was white and wide and empty. Alex's horse waited, dark and restless. He handed the girls 2 worn blankets. They didn't thank him. He didn't ask them to. They rode in silence through the gray hills, the sound of hooves muffled by snow. Now and then Angelina glanced at him, trying to read the man who had paid $2 for their lives. There was no greed in him, no gloating. Just quiet. As the miles passed, her anger began to twist into confusion. Who was this man? What did he want? Why had he spoken so little? Once, when she caught him glancing at the sky, she noticed how his hand trembled slightly on the reins, as if some old pain still haunted him. He looked like a man running from his own ghost. The land grew lonelier the farther they went. The trees rose dark against the fading light, their branches bent with snow. Li Hua's lips were blue, but she didn't complain. Angelina wanted to ask her where she came from, what her story was, but pride kept her silent. It was Li Hua who finally spoke, her voice thin but steady. Why did you come back? She asked the wind more than him. Men don't come back for those they buy. Alex didn't turn. I wasn't coming back for you, he said softly. I was coming back for firewood. Then I saw you. The answer wasn't enough. It wasn't supposed to be. But there was something in his tone that quieted them. Not pity. Just truth. Night fell before they reached the cabin. The snow deepened, swallowing the trail. Angelina's hands had gone numb, her face raw with cold. When Alex finally stopped, it was before a small cabin half buried under drifts. Smoke curled from the chimney in thin, wavering ribbons. He opened the door and warmth spilled out. A small fire, a rough table, 2 chairs, 1 bed. "You can rest here," he said. "There's stew if you're hungry." Angelina stared at the pot by the fire. "You think food makes this right?" "No," he said simply. "But it's what I got." Li Hua stepped past him first, her eyes flicking across the room as though judging its safety. She knelt by the fire and stretched her hands toward the flames. Angelina followed, slow and uncertain, her pride flickering like a candle refusing to die. Alex closed the door behind them, shutting out the wind. For a moment no one spoke. Only the sound of the fire filled the silence, steady and low. Then Angelina whispered almost to herself, "You'll regret this, mister. We won't obey." Alex's eyes met hers. There was a kind of sorrow in them that didn't belong to the moment. It belonged to years before, to losses she could not yet imagine. He nodded once as if he already knew. "Maybe," he said. "But I reckon regret's warmer than loneliness." The fire popped, throwing sparks that rose like stars. Outside, the wind moaned against the cabin walls. Inside, 3 strangers sat by a single flame, each holding more secrets than comfort. And somewhere deep in the snow-choked woods, unseen eyes watched the smoke climb into the pale winter sky. The cabin creaked like an old heart trying to remember how to beat. Morning light bled slowly through the frosted window panes, turning the smoke from the hearth into ribbons of gold. Alex was already awake, kneeling by the stove, coaxing a new flame from dying coals. His movements were steady, silent, deliberate. He'd lived long enough with emptiness to know how to tend a fragile fire. Angelina woke first, startled by the quiet. For a heartbeat she didn't know where she was. The scent of pine and smoke replaced the stench of the auction yard, and that realization unsettled her more than any nightmare. She sat up on the blanket near the wall and looked toward the man by the fire. He didn't turn when he spoke. "There's bread on the table. It's old, but it'll fill you." His voice was low, rough as gravel rolled by a stream. She noticed the faint tremor in his right hand as he stirred the coals. Guilt or cold, she couldn't tell which. Li Hua stirred behind her, still half dreaming, her dark hair spilling over her shoulder like spilled ink. When she opened her eyes, she murmured something soft in Mandarin that sounded like a prayer. The morning settled in layers of sound. The soft hiss of the kettle, the distant call of a crow, the girl's quiet breathing. Alex poured water into 3 chipped cups. He didn't sit. Angelina watched him like one watches a storm cloud, part awe, part caution. She didn't trust quiet men. She'd learned they could carry violence deeper than loud ones. When Li Hua finally spoke, it was with the careful politeness of someone raised to keep peace even when surrounded by cruelty. "You saved us," she said, eyes lowered. "But why?" Alex didn't answer at once. He tore the bread in half, then half again, and handed each piece to them. "Didn't seem right," he said. "That's all." Angelina snorted. "Not right's one thing. Buying strangers for $2 is another." His gaze lifted, calm and unblinking. "You'd rather I left you there?" Her jaw clenched. "I'd rather you asked first." The silence that followed was sharp as glass. Li Hua placed a hand on Angelina's arm, a gentle reminder to let the wind pass. Alex went back to the stove. The faint scent of stew filled the air, earthy and thin. Angelina's stomach growled, but she crossed her arms instead. Pride had kept her alive longer than mercy ever had. Hours later, the snow began again, fine, glittering flakes that drifted past the windows like ash from some faraway fire. Alex went outside to split wood. His shadow stretched across the snow, long and solitary. The women watched him from inside, each pretending not to. He worked methodically, his breath rising in visible bursts, his axe steady even as his arm bled a faint scar beneath his sleeve. Li Hua's eyes softened with something that wasn't quite pity. "He carries grief," she whispered. Angelina frowned. "Everyone does." Li Hua shook her head. "His grief walks beside him. I can see its footprints." They spent the afternoon in uneasy quiet. Li Hua swept the floor with an old broom, humming in a language the cabin hadn't heard before. The sound filled the space with something warm, something human. Angelina tried to ignore it, but eventually she found herself tapping her fingers against her knee in rhythm. By dusk, Alex returned with a bundle of logs and snow melting in his hair. The cabin smelled faintly of wild sage, Li Hua had found a few dried sprigs hanging by the rafters and tossed them into the fire. For the first time, the place didn't feel like a cage. At supper, Angelina finally gave in to hunger. She ate in silence, the stew thin but comforting. Alex poured her another cup without being asked. She wanted to refuse, but the warmth in her hands betrayed her. "Where you from?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Back east," she said curtly. "Don't matter where. Ain't going back." He nodded once. "Good. Ain't much left anywhere worth going back to." Li Hua spoke then, her voice low. "My home is gone too. Burned. The river where I washed my mother's hands still runs, but I can't see it anymore." Alex's hand froze over his bowl. "I'm sorry." Li Hua smiled faintly. "So am I." The fire popped, and the sound drew all three of them into stillness. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt shared. Later that night, when the storm outside grew fierce, Alex brought in an extra blanket from a chest and placed it between their sleeping spaces. "Floor's cold," he said. "Use it." Angelina eyed him warily. "You planning to stand watch over us, mister?" He glanced toward the door. "Over the storm." She huffed but said nothing more. When he left to secure the barn, Li Hua whispered, "He's kind." Angelina rolled over. Kindness is what men call it before they take something. But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed herself anymore. The wind howled through the trees that night. The fire dwindled. Sleep came slow. Angelina dreamed of her father's farm before it was lost to debt, of warm bread and spring rivers, of laughter that didn't cut. Li Hua dreamed of lanterns floating on a moonlit river, her mother's voice calling her name. Alex dreamed of his wife, of her last breath, the child they never had, the snow that buried everything he loved. When dawn came, it was the quiet kind that follows surrender. The storm had sealed them in. Snow pressed against the door, muting the world outside. Angelina tried to push it open, but the drift was too high. "We're trapped," she muttered. "Then we make do," Alex said, pulling off his gloves. "I'll dig us out when the sun's higher." The hours that followed stitched them together in strange, invisible ways. Angelina helped grind corn into meal. Li Hua mended the torn curtain with thread pulled from her own sleeve. Alex cut a small vent in the roof to let the smoke escape. Three strangers moving around each other in rhythm, like notes in a melody they hadn't meant to play. That evening, Angelina caught her reflection in the frosted window and barely recognized herself. There was color in her cheeks again. Why? It frightened her. She turned to Alex and said, "Don't think this means we trust you." He didn't look up from whittling a small wooden figure by the fire. "I don't," he said. "Trust ain't bought. It's built." Li Hua's laughter was soft as snow falling on still water. "Then let's build, one small kindness at a time." Outside, the storm began again, gentler now, almost like forgiveness descending from the sky. The three of them sat close by the fire, shadows touching on the wall. The warmth between them wasn't love, not yet, but something just as dangerous, the beginning of belief. When the wind finally stilled, Alex rose and went to the window. In the distance, faint tracks cut through the snow, too many for a single traveler. He stared for a long time, his jaw tightening before turning back toward the fire. "Keep the lamp low tonight," he said quietly. "Someone's out there." The days that followed the storm carried a quiet rhythm, the kind that made time feel circular. Morning light would spill through the cabin window, soft as breath over glass, and the three of them would wake to the same sequence of small mercies: the hiss of the kettle, the soft scrape of wood on the stove, the creak of the floorboards beneath Alex's steady steps. It was as if the storm outside had settled inside them too, not gone, just gentled. Angelina had begun to hum again. Not loudly, never enough to fill the room, but just under her breath as she swept the floor or cut vegetables. The tune was shapeless and half forgotten, yet something about it steadied her. She caught Alex listening once, pretending not to, and it made her cheeks warm in a way she didn't understand. When he looked up from his work, their eyes met, hers uncertain, his unreadable. He gave a small nod, like acknowledgement without invitation. She didn't smile back, but she didn't look away either. Li Hua was different. The cold never seemed to touch her. She'd sit near the fire, patching clothes or carving thin strips of bark into shapes of flowers. When she moved, the air seemed to soften. Once, Alex found her outside, kneeling beside the patch of ground where the snow had melted around the hearth's drain. She was digging at the earth with her hands, bare fingers pink from the chill. When he asked what she was doing, she said simply, "Looking for something that still remembers spring." And somehow that made sense to him. Their lives began to take on patterns, not of master and servant, but of survival stitched with small kindnesses. Angelina repaired Alex's torn gloves without asking. Li Hua began saving the last spoonful of stew each night to feed the thin dog that had started sleeping beneath their porch. Alex never spoke about the dog, but she noticed he left scraps out by the door now too. Sometimes at night, Alex would read from a tattered book he'd carried since his youth. His voice was rough and slow, each word rolling like gravel down a hill. Angelina would pretend not to listen, but her head would tilt ever so slightly toward him. Li Hua, eyes half closed, would translate lines softly in Mandarin under her breath, giving them a music that language alone couldn't hold. It was then, in those quiet hours, that the walls of the cabin stopped feeling like confinement and began to feel like shelter. Yet peace in the frontier was a fragile thing. It cracked under the weight of memory. It began one morning when Alex rode into town for supplies. The snow had begun to thaw, rivers cutting through the white with veins of mud. Angelina and Li Hua watched from the doorway as he disappeared into the trees. He had left them a small rifle by the door. In case of wolves, he'd said. His tone made Angelina wonder if he meant the kind that walked on two legs. The hours crawled. Angelina tried to sew, but the needle shook in her fingers. Li Hua brewed tea that tasted faintly of pine and earth. By the time the sun started to fall, worry had hardened into fear. When the sound of hoofbeats finally reached them, it was not the steady rhythm of Alex's horse. It was uneven, dragging, followed by a slurred voice calling, "You there, cabin folk." Angelina froze. Two men appeared at the tree line, their faces red with drink, their coats marked by the brand of Burke Hollander's trading post. One carried a pistol loose at his hip, the other grinned with the easy cruelty of someone who thought no law could touch him. "We're looking for Crow," the taller one said, spitting into the snow. "Word is, he's got himself 2 strays he's keeping warm out here." Li Hua's hand brushed Angelina's sleeve, a warning, a plea. Angelina stepped forward, chin high. "Ain't no strays here. Just us." The men laughed. "That's what we heard. You and the China woman. Town says you belong to Burke." Angelina's stomach turned cold. "Burke don't own people." The man's grin widened. "That's funny." He said otherwise. When he reached for the doorframe, Angelina lifted the rifle, her hand steady despite the tremor in her breath. "You take one more step and I swear I'll—" The sound of hooves cut her off. Alex rode into the clearing fast, his horse steaming, eyes dark with fury. "Leave," he said. His voice carried no shout, no threat, just the kind of quiet that made even the wind stop listening. The men hesitated. The shorter one spat. "You think you can take Burke's property without paying for it?" "I did pay," Alex said. $2. They laughed again, but this time uneasily. He dismounted, moving between them and the cabin door. His hand rested near his revolver. "Now get off my land." The taller man smirked. "Ain't your land, Crow. You're just squattin' where your wife died." That struck something buried deep. Alex's jaw flexed, his knuckles whitening. For a second, Angelina saw the storm behind his calm, grief sharpened into danger. But he didn't draw. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that the men felt the heat of him, the steadiness that comes from knowing one's ghosts by name. "Then you'd best go dig her up and ask if she minds," he said. "Otherwise, get gone before I stop being polite." The shorter man cursed and grabbed the reins of his horse. The other spat one last word, "Fool," and followed. When their figures vanished among the pines, Alex's shoulders sagged, the tension draining like a wound finally bleeding free. Inside, Angelina set the rifle down. Her voice was tight. "They'll tell Burke." "I know. Then he'll come." He nodded. "I know that too." Li Hua crossed the room and laid a hand on his arm. "Why protect us?" she asked. "You could send us away." Alex looked at her, then at Angelina. "Because someone once needed saving and I was too late." The air shifted. Angelina saw then that the quiet in him wasn't emptiness, it was punishment. He'd been carrying guilt like a stone in his chest for years, and somehow by saving them he was trying to lift it even just an inch. That night they didn't sleep easily. The wind howled through the chimney, shaking loose flakes of ash. Alex sat by the fire, polishing his rifle, eyes on the door. Angelina pretended to read but watched him instead, her pulse matching the rhythm of his movements. Li Hua mended the torn cuff of his coat, her fingers brushing his wrist once, enough to make him glance at her with something fragile flickering behind the weariness. By morning, the world seemed deceptively peaceful again. The sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the snow in shades of silver. Alex went out to mend the fence line. Angelina followed, carrying his coat. The air between them felt heavy with something unsaid. "You don't have to keep us," she said quietly. "We can work off what we owe." He straightened, eyes narrowing against the sun. "You don't owe me a damn thing." Her throat tightened. "Then why do I feel like I do?" He looked at her for a long time before saying, "Because folks like us ain't used to kindness without a price." She swallowed hard, the truth of it cutting deeper than she expected. When he took the coat from her hands, their fingers touched. Just a moment, but long enough to spark something fragile, something warm enough to defy the cold. Later that evening, Li Hua found an old locket under a loose floorboard. Inside was a drawing of a woman and a child, both gone now, their faces faded by time. She said nothing but left it on the table beside Alex's empty chair. When he returned, he stood looking at it for a long while before tucking it into his pocket and whispering something that might have been a thank you. As the fire burned low, Angelina and Li Hua sat together, shoulders touching. "He's a good man," Li Hua said softly. Angelina's eyes stayed on the fire. "Good men don't last long out here." "Then maybe we protect him," Li Hua replied. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows. Far off, faint as breath, came the sound of another horse's cry, not friendly, not lost, just waiting. Alex heard it first, his hand tightening around the rifle. He didn't move, but his eyes met theirs. "They found us," he said. The sun never truly rose that morning, it only paled the dark. A strange hush clung to the air, the kind that falls before something breaks. Alex woke before the others, the unease already crawling through his veins like cold water. He stepped outside, boots sinking into half-frozen mud, breath steaming in the chill. The valley stretched silent before him, except for the crows circling far off. He could feel it, trouble was coming. Inside, the women stirred. Li Hua folded the blankets with careful hands while Angelina raked the coals into a new flame. The smell of wood smoke filled the cabin. It was almost peaceful. Almost. When Alex came back in, his shoulders carried snow and silence. He didn't take off his coat. "Pack what you can," he said. Angelina looked up sharply. "Why?" "They'll be here soon." Li Hua stilled. Her fingers tightened around the hem of the blanket. "Burke?" Alex nodded once. "And whoever he drags with him." The words hung heavy. Angelina's pulse kicked. The memory of those two drunk men, Burke's messengers, flashed across her mind. She wanted to laugh, to curse, to tell Alex they could just run. But where could they go? The snow hadn't melted enough to open the mountain pass, and even if it had, the world beyond wasn't built for women without names. Li Hua's voice broke the silence. "We can hide." Alex shook his head. "No. A man like Burke don't come to talk. He comes to take. We'll meet him standing." Angelina stepped closer. "You think you can fight them all?" His eyes met hers, quiet as always, but full of a weary determination that felt older than his years. "I don't think," he said. "I know." By mid-morning, the sound of hooves rolled through the valley like thunder wrapped in distance. The women stood by the window, watching figures emerge from the haze. 5 men on horseback, Burke Hollander riding at their front. His coat was wolf fur-lined, his beard trimmed and glinting with frost. He looked like wealth trying to disguise itself as justice. Behind him rode his hired hands, faces hidden under hats, rifles slung across their saddles. Alex stepped outside. The air burned his lungs. He didn't look back at the cabin. "Stay inside," he said, and the tone of it made obedience feel like survival. Angelina's fists clenched. "Don't be a fool." But the door closed before she could finish. Outside, the horses halted in a half-circle, their breath ghosting into the air. Burke dismounted, his boots crunching on the snow. "Alex Crow," he called, voice smooth as oil. "Been a while since we did business." Alex didn't move. "We never did business." Burke smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Maybe not proper. But seems you've got something of mine. 2 women bought on my account. Time to settle up." Alex's jaw tightened. "You had your chance. I bought them fair. They're free now." "Free?" Burke's laughter cracked through the cold. "Don't talk church words to me, Crow. You think a slip of paper and $2 makes 'em free? They're property. You stole from me." Alex took one step forward. "I stole nothing. You lost what you never owned." Burke's expression cooled. "You always were self-righteous. You think this land's your redemption? It ain't. You can't wash the blood off what you done." A muscle jumped in Alex's cheek. "You talk like you were there." "I was," Burke said softly, "when your wife begged you to stay. When you left her to freeze with that sick child. Don't look at me like you forgot." The words hit like a blow. For a long, trembling moment, Alex said nothing. The sound of the wind filled the space where defense should have been. Inside the cabin, Angelina's breath caught. She glanced at Li Hua, whose eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Alex finally spoke, voice low, breaking like ice underfoot. You talk about what you don't understand. She was gone before the storm even broke. Burke shrugged. Maybe not. Point is, you don't get to play savior now. He gestured to his men. Take the women. Leave him breathing. I like watching men realize they ain't heroes after all. The first rider dismounted, snow crunching beneath his boots. Alex's revolver was already drawn before the man's hand touched his holster. The shot cracked the silence wide open. A bird burst from the trees. The man fell, red blooming in the snow like a rose no one wanted to see. Then chaos. The second man fired. The bullet tore through the cabin door. Angelina ducked, grabbing the rifle. Li Hua pulled her down. Alex moved fast, firing again, taking cover behind the chopping block. The sound of gunfire rolled through the valley, echoing off frozen rock. Inside, Angelina's hands shook, but she found the courage she hadn't known she still owned. She pushed the window open, aimed, and fired. The shot went wide but startled one of Burke's riders enough to unseat him. Li Hua took a burning stick from the hearth and threw it onto the pile of spilled oil by the wall. The flames caught instantly, roaring up the side of the cabin. Angelina! Alex shouted. Get out! The women burst through the back door, smoke clawing their lungs. Alex met them at the corner of the cabin, his shoulder bleeding where a bullet had grazed him. Into the trees, he yelled. But Angelina hesitated, glancing back at Burke, who was reloading calmly amid the chaos, a snake waiting for his strike. You can't just let him. I said go. The force in his voice broke through her defiance. She grabbed Li Hua's hand, pulling her into the pines. Behind them, the fire climbed higher, painting the snow in violent orange. Alex stayed. He moved like a man unafraid of dying but unwilling to waste it. 2 more shots rang out. One his, one theirs. Then a scream that wasn't his. When the smoke thickened, he disappeared into it. The women stumbled through the forest, branches whipping their faces, the sound of fire following like a hungry animal. They collapsed beside the frozen creek, gasping. Angelina turned, watching the sky above the trees glow red. He's still there, she whispered. Li Hua gripped her wrist. He told us to run. Angelina's throat ached. I ain't leaving him. Back at the cabin, the blaze roared, consuming wood and memory alike. Burke stood at the edge of the flames, face flickering with the light. Stubborn fool, he muttered and raised his pistol. Alex emerged from the smoke, coughing, his shirt half-burned, eyes blazing like something half-human. He fired once. Burke staggered, clutching his chest, and fell into the snow without sound. The last of his men fled. Only the fire stayed, burning the sky. When Alex found the women again, dawn had begun to gray the world. His coat was gone, his hands blackened, his body trembling. Angelina ran to him, her anger forgotten, her voice breaking. You're hurt. He smiled faintly. I've been worse. Li Hua tore a strip from her skirt, pressing it against his wound. The blood seeped through, bright and terrible. Alex swayed, catching himself on a tree. They won't come back, he said. Burke's gone. Angelina looked toward the smoke still rising in the distance. Then we got no home now. Alex met her gaze, the corner of his mouth lifting just barely. Maybe that's how new ones start. The wind carried the smell of ash and pine. The snow under their feet was red where it melted. None of them spoke for a while. They just stood together, 3 silhouettes against the bruised horizon, broken, breathing, alive. Then Alex's knees buckled. Angelina caught him before he fell fully, her arms wrapping around his shoulders. Don't you dare, she whispered fiercely. Not after all that. His breath came shallow, fogging the air between them. Keep moving, he said. River's ahead. We'll follow it out. Li Hua nodded, eyes glistening. We'll carry you if we must. He managed a faint laugh that turned into a cough. I don't doubt it. As they started toward the river, the first light of dawn brushed their faces. Angelina looked back one last time at the plume of smoke twisting upward, fading into the pale sky. The cabin was gone, but something else had survived, something that couldn't be burned. And from far off, across the valley, came the echo of another horse. Slow, steady, coming closer. The storm had spent itself by dawn, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed the whole valley was holding its breath. Snow covered everything, the ruins of the cabin, the frozen creek, even the blood that had melted briefly before freezing again. Smoke still curled from the ashes, thin and gray, drifting upward like the last memory of a fire that had once meant warmth. The sky was pale gold, the kind of color that promises mercy but delivers only truth. Angelina woke first. Her back ached from sleeping against the cold ground, and her arms were still wrapped around Alex, whose head rested in her lap. His face was pale beneath the soot, his beard rimed with frost. He looked too still, too quiet, as if the storm had stolen not only his strength but the noise of his breath. She pressed her hand to his chest and felt the faint rise beneath her palm. Relief broke through her in a shaky sigh. Li Hua knelt nearby, her hair tangled with snowflakes, her fingers red from tending the small fire she'd managed to keep alive through the night. She was murmuring something under her breath, half prayer, half lullaby, in a language Angelina didn't understand but somehow trusted. When Angelina caught her eye, Li Hua gave a tired, hopeful smile. "He's alive," she whispered. Angelina nodded, her voice raw. "Barely." Alex stirred, a low groan breaking the fragile quiet. His eyes opened to slits, catching the glint of morning light. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, hoarse and slow, "You stayed." Angelina laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "Couldn't leave you, could we? You'd only come find us again." He smiled weakly. "Reckon I would." Li Hua poured water from a melted snow tin and lifted it to his lips. He drank, then coughed, blood streaking the snow near his hand. She wiped it away gently, her touch steady. "You must rest," she said softly. "We'll move when you can stand." But Alex's eyes were fixed on the rising smoke from what had once been his home. "There's nothing left to go back to." Angelina followed his gaze. The cabin was nothing more than a blackened skeleton, the snow already reclaiming it. She thought of the nights they'd spent there, the laughter, the silence, the fragile beginnings of trust, and felt a pang deeper than fear. Loss had come for all of them, yet here they were, still breathing. "We'll build again," she said quietly. "Somewhere new." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no distance in his eyes. Just tired acceptance, and a flicker of something that felt dangerously close to faith. They gathered what little remained. A rifle, a tin cup, the scarf Li Hua had used to stop his bleeding. The rest was ash and memory. When the sun finally climbed above the ridge, they began walking toward it. The snow cracked beneath their boots. Each step was slow, deliberate, a rhythm of pain and promise. The valley stretched before them, endless white broken by clusters of pines and the faint glimmer of a frozen river in the distance. Alex leaned on Angelina's shoulder, his strength waning. Li Hua walked ahead, leaving a narrow path for them to follow. She moved like someone born to hardship, her frame delicate, yet her will fierce as winter itself. After a while, Alex spoke again, his breath shallow. "Burke?" Angelina hesitated. "Gone. You made sure of that." His jaw tightened. No man should die with hate in his mouth. "He earned it," she said. He didn't answer. Regret was written in the slump of his shoulders, in the way his gaze stayed fixed on the snow ahead. Angelina wanted to argue, to shake the goodness out of him, but she understood now, it wasn't weakness that made him kind. It was survival. When they reached the river, Li Hua knelt to test the ice. It groaned but held. "We follow this," she said. "It will take us toward town." Angelina frowned. "And then what? You think they'll welcome us?" Three burned ghosts dragging each other through the cold. Li Hua met her eyes, calm and unyielding. "They will see what we are, not what we were." The word struck something inside Angelina, something long frozen beginning to thaw. She looked at Alex, who had sunk to one knee beside the river, breathing hard. His face was gray, his lips trembling. Panic clawed at her throat. She knelt beside him, gripping his coat. "Don't you quit on us now." He tried to smile, but his strength was gone. "You sound just like her," he murmured. Angelina blinked. "Like who?" "My wife," he whispered. "She used to say that when the fever took me once." "Don't you quit," Alex crowed. "Guess I didn't listen then, but maybe I will now." His eyes fluttered closed. For a heartbeat, everything froze, the wind, the water, the world. Li Hua rushed forward, pressing her hands against his chest. "He's fading," she said. "Help me." Together they lifted him, dragging him toward a fallen tree for shelter. The effort burned through their arms, but neither stopped. Angelina's breath came in ragged bursts. "We can't lose him," she said. "Not after all this." Li Hua's voice broke. "He gave us life. We give it back." She tore open the small pouch she carried and poured crushed herbs into the water, pressing the mixture to his wound. The scent of cedar and blood mingled with the cold. Alex stirred again, faint but breathing. Angelina brushed the hair from his forehead, her hand trembling. "You hear me, Crow? You ain't done yet." He exhaled, the breath weak but real. "Ain't that the truth?" Hours passed before he could stand. When he did, the sun was low, bleeding gold across the horizon. They followed the river until they reached a rise overlooking the valley. Below, far in the distance, smoke curled from chimneys, a settlement. The promise of fire, of people, of beginning again. Alex leaned heavily on Angelina, his arm draped around her shoulders. "You could go on without me," he said. Angelina shot him a glare that almost hid her tears. "Don't start. You're coming. We all are." Li Hua smiled faintly. "Together. Or not at all." The words settled between them like an oath. They took one more step, then another, until the ridge leveled out and the wind grew gentler. When they reached the edge of the woods, Alex stopped. He turned back toward the valley, toward the smoke still rising from the ruins. The light caught his face just then, washing away the soot, revealing the man beneath, the one who had fought, bled, and chosen mercy when the world had offered none. "Guess the storm's done," he said softly. Angelina shook her head. "No. It just changed us." Li Hua touched her shoulder, her gaze distant. "The storm leaves what must stay." For a long moment, none of them moved. The snow fell again, thin and silent, covering the footprints they'd left behind. Ahead, the faint sound of church bells drifted across the wind. Hope calling in its small, stubborn voice. Alex took one final breath, straightened his shoulders, and began walking toward it. The women followed, two shadows beside his own, their paths joined now not by coin but by choice. The rising sun cast their silhouettes long across the snow, merging them into one. Behind them, the valley slept, holding its secrets beneath the ice. Ahead, the world waited, cold, uncertain, and impossibly wide. And though none of them spoke it aloud, each carried the same thought, the same vow: we made it through the fire. Somewhere far off, a crow called over the hills. It sounded almost like laughter, like the earth itself remembering mercy after a long, hard winter.